So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for the second in the series of 2 webinars that we've hosted on our recently released case study, How New Mexico Has Embraced Teacher Residencies. So today's session is going to explore the role of the state in the exciting transformation that's underway in New Mexico. As we get started, we'd love if you can drop answers in the chat to the question, where do you see opportunities to create more supportive policy for teacher preparation? And we'll throw that question in the chat so you can refer to it. There it is from Gretchen. Amy, which CUNY campus are you from? Oh, that's no problem. No problem. So I'm seeing things that have to do with finances, right? Tuition waivers, financial investment in pathways, diversification and incentive programs. So please continue to share your thoughts if they're still percolating in your mind. And I think this webinar is going to touch on points that we think are really relevant beyond New Mexico. So just before we begin, I'll give you a brief overview of our hour together. We're going to start with an introduction from Prepared to Teach's Executive Director, Karen DeMoss. Then we're going to hear 3 brief presentations on different aspects of the statewide work that's gone on in New Mexico from 3 leaders who've been really integral to the success that New Mexico is experiencing. Then we're going to shift to a panel conversation, and we'll save time at the end for you all to ask questions directly to the panelists. After we've reached the end of our hour, if any of you have, more conversation, more questions, some members of the Prepared to Teach team will be able to stick around and keep that going if that will be helpful to you. So I'll get us started by passing to Karen.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here with you today. It's really, really great to be able to center the work that New Mexico has done in moving towards a statewide shift towards really strong clinical practice for all of their pathways, and the residency work in particular is what we work on. So I'm going to give a brief introduction about what we think we have learned from New Mexico. All of this is very early. There aren't any states that have really changed their whole teacher education ecosystems, but New Mexico is, I think, farther down the road probably than most states. And this is what I'm going to go through a little sort of a brief overview of what it is that we think we have learned from that. There will be a theory of change document that is released in our newsletter at the beginning of December. We'll have a QR code and a link that you could sign up if you wanted to join that newsletter if you're not already on it. So I am going to let us go and go to the next slide. From our perspective, we think that there are 2 parallel, equally important efforts that need to happen, one at a state level and one at a local level. So I'll go a little bit more into detail on that, but just so you get a sense of what we're doing. For us, the blue side equals the state and the pink side equals the local level. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we think the major like orientations in this state level and in this local level look like. And then you might want, if you haven't already, to take a look at the case study. I believe that link is getting dropped for you right now, because that covers the side that we covered in our last webinar of the local level. And in addition, it gives you some more information about the state level that won't necessarily be part of what the panelists are talking about. So at the state level, wait, before I go to that, here on this image here, if the blue is the state and the pink is the sort of the localities, which is, you know, all your prep programs and your local partnerships, you'll see that there's this space in the middle. And in that space in the middle, you see that there's some intersections that need to happen. If you only work the state over here and it's not intersecting with the field, we know what that's like. And if you're only working the field over here and the policy isn't linking, we know what that's like. So Prepare to Teach has been working with Public Education Department and the preparation programs and their district partners for several years now on trying to make these linkages between what goes on at the state level and what goes on at the local levels in ways to develop these really high quality programs. So at the state level, I'm going to highlight 3 things that we think are super important. And the first is that you get a signal from the top, as we say. In the case of New Mexico, it was the Legislative Education Study Council, it was the Legislative Finance Committee, it was the Public Education Department, and it was the Bureau, the Pathways Bureau that Phoebe leads. All of these groups said, we think this is really important. And that signal helps really the local, this sort of local players on the pink side say, oh, well, then let's come together around this. So that the signal from the top of the state, don't underestimate its importance, I think would be one of the lessons that we would have. Second is, you need investment. So you can say it's important to do this, but as we saw in the chat, if people don't have the money to do it, it's not going to work. So how do you get that investment? That was a lot of the work that we did. We're going to chat a resource here that was part of those conversations. There also was a financial burden survey about candidates needing money while they're going through their clinical practice. It was part of the conversation. But this one document that is coming, the Path to Equity in New Mexico, it's actually state-specific analysis of how much money it costs in turnover and what an investment in residencies might be able to provide. Those are analyses that are doable in any state, and they help get the commitment for investment. Next, at the state level is expectations from the state, but also with flexibility. So if the state in the legislative session had made a whole bunch of policies and said, and you need to do this by that date and that by this date, it would be all compliance. So instead, they really gave the expectations of what the vision of a good, strong residency system could look like. And then they let Public Education Department, what we call PED, really implement that and have the flexibility for it. So those are 3 key pieces at the state side that we think are necessary. And then at the local side, really these collective efforts. New Mexico has been working in a community of practice, I'll get to that in just a second, to really design what it looks like to have New Mexico's version of teacher residencies. In fact, all residencies are modeled on the documents that were created by this community of practice. In addition to that community of practice, we also have the need for evidence. So this entire group of 8 institutions of higher education, they have come together to say, here are the data that we need to collect. Let's collect them in these approaches so that we can know we're doing apples to apples and that we can really readily bring them into the kinds of analyses that we need. And we even have a federal grant to help with that sort of analysis that I think Phoebe might mention. And finally, at the local level, really working on the narrative shift, because we don't necessarily have a very facilitative narrative about education, educators, education, teacher preparation. It's not necessarily a positive narrative everywhere. So this group got together, and I believe you're going to get a chat to something that when you're looking to be inspired, you'll want to click that link because it's a video from all of the programs in the first year. So they hadn't even completed 1 year yet of what the teacher residencies had meant for them. And this video really does help shift the narrative that yes, the folks on the ground are really making this powerful shift for change. So when the folks on the ground can show we're doing this change, that supports the legislature to continue to support. When the legislature supports, it continues to support the programs in helping make the change. So it's really a mutual cycle there. So that's the pieces that we've learned about the sort of big picture. And what we think is critical in that big picture is having that collaborative community at that local level. So for those of you who know Ev Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory, he's got this diffusion of innovation curve. You got these folks over in the blue, like they're like, yeah, let's do that. It's going to be great. And then a little after Ev Rogers' work came out, which shows how innovations can like grow and be diffused, people started noting this gap. And that gap is the implementation gap. And for us, it is the community of practice that fills in that implementation gap, because people come together 4 to 5 times a year to say, how do we move this forward? So that would be the next piece that we would say is important, is to have something like a statewide community of practice that also helps show your legislature that you all are working on this together, not in competition, and you are the solution for the state's challenges instead of part of the blocks. I believe with that, I get to pass it over. Oh, here's our links. We're going to show you this later too. But the newsletters where you sign up and you get the releases. Linktree has a lot of our different signups in the case study, which also was chatted to you. Those are those links, and those will come back to you. We also send the slide deck out to you after the call, so don't worry if you don't get to it. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Phoebe.
Hello, everybody. I'm so honored to be here, and I'll take a minute to introduce myself and tell a little bit about my role in this work. So my name is Phoebe Valenchik. I'm the Director of Educator Pathways for the New Mexico Public Education Department. And I've been working alongside Prepared to Teach and the other stakeholders across the state to support this teacher residency journey over the past few years. Can just say we would not be able to do this work with that community, without that community of practice bridge that Prepared to Teach has really provided. So incredibly honored to be here and sharing a little bit about New Mexico's journey today. And we'll be happy to answer any questions at the end that can support you all in your journeys. So you can go to the next slide. New Mexico is really focused on creating a comprehensive systems vision around residency that includes multiple entry points that all lead to equitable, high quality preparation through full year residency. So entry point 1 is really or on-ramp 1, we call that high school or early learning entry point. We've got lots of programs that support that in New Mexico, from near-peer tutoring, after-school clubs, programs like Educators Rising and youth apprenticeships, and then our dual credit pathways to college and teaching. So really getting people and candidates interested in the career of education early in high school, and then supporting them through the pathways continuing on. Can hit the next pathway into college. So really fortunate in New Mexico, we have a lot of tuition support, and pretty much educators in New Mexico can go to school for free and receive their bachelor's degree in education. There's just been scholarships extended on to the master's degree level. We have some amazing Grow Your Own programs. One is called Educator Fellows that really supports our EA pathway with the salary and benefits while they're working towards their degrees. And then our hope is that would ultimately culminate in a paid residency or apprenticeship in their final year of preparation. On-ramp 3 is focused on our graduate degree program. So again, utilizing the tuition support that exists, possibly the Educator Fellows and Grow Your Own initiatives, and then ending in a paid residency or apprenticeship. And our on-ramp 4 is for our career changers. So our alt candidates and people who may be changing careers and to become educators, but also hoping to support them with a really high quality preparation, because we know that preparation matters. So hoping that strong clinical practice experience and a paid residency is where those candidates can also be provided opportunity to learn. You can go to the next slide. So this is just a brief timeline of the journey so far in New Mexico. It really began in 2018 with some residency pilots, some small residency pilots at just one institution, and then some financial burden surveys that were given out to candidates that really showed the the significant burden that the clinical practice requirements places on candidates and how that was really a barrier to entry for a lot of people getting into the teaching profession. That and the data that we were able to get from the pilots was really the two things that came together, along with a lot of advocacy and stakeholder input to get the House Bill 13 into law, and the funding that provided $35,000 stipend for residents in New Mexico. Once that House Bill 13 had passed, we worked with Prepared to Teach to really create those co-created with district partners, EPP partners, outside stakeholders, quality standards around what residency should look like in order to provide the strongest preparation possible. And I believe that those are publicly available too. And then right now where we're at is we were recently awarded a federal EIR, Education, Innovation, and Research grant that is going to further support the work that we have already really done in New Mexico that's focused on a few different kind of sustainability goals that I'll talk about in a second. But we focused our work there on really how that grant could support the infrastructure and the nuances of what needs to create for high quality residency, and the equity that needs to be built across the state so that all residencies have that high quality bar. You can go to the next slide. So the EIR grant and our work right now in New Mexico is focused around three specific goals, which are strengthening our recruitment and the diversity of our educators to really represent the students that they serve in New Mexico. Like I said, reducing the variability to ensure that there's equitable access to quality preparation and that all teachers deserve that high quality preparation, because all of our students deserve well-prepared teachers. And then creating a sustainably funded residency system. So right now we're really lucky in New Mexico because we have House Bill 13 and we have the funding, the legislative funding to back it. As you all know, states can change and things can shift. So we're really working to create braided funding streams and to think about what could make this a sustainable vision that could be the reality of how all educators are prepared moving forward. You can go to the next slide now. So this is what teacher residency looks like right now, and what is outlined in House Bill 13. So all residents receive a $35,000 stipend while simultaneously enrolled in an educator prep program or partnering university. They're placed in a fully immersive year-long clinically rich experience with a partner school district. And most importantly, or really importantly, which what Teresa will speak about in a little bit, is this is in a co-teaching model with a level 2 or 3 mentor. So we've really, and that's the quality experience that we're really working to define this year, is co-teaching is a very rich preparation model that allows an educator to go through various different learning opportunities to really ensure that they receive that high quality preparation when they're done with that year. And we're really excited about the trainings that we're branching out statewide. Teresa will share a little bit more about that right now. And that is the innovation of our EIR grant, really focusing on what co-teaching brings to a preparation experience and to the students in a classroom that have that co-teaching model. And then residents are employed for 3 years following their residency at that partner district. You can go to the next slide. We're super excited about our progress to date. I think that this slide really speaks for itself. Our representation is growing, and I think we're really getting closer to having a representative teacher workforce for our students. There's a 92% on-time graduation rate, so we're really showing that the quality of preparation is supportive to help our candidates graduate. We're projecting over 400 residents in the future, and each year our numbers have steadily increased as we really define what recruitment efforts need to look like in the state. We have residents in 8 of our IHEs, and they're preparing about 75% of our new teachers in the state right now. About half of our New Mexico school districts have residents. And right now, 33% of newly certified teachers are going through residency, and we hope to see those numbers continue to grow. All right. Well, with that, I'll pass it on to Teresa to talk a little bit more about the co-teaching model and the work we're doing there.
Great. Thanks, Phoebe. My name is Teresa Washatek, and basically, the reason I'm here is because I was really blessed to work at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota. And one of the things that we were able to do is get a $5 million teacher quality enhancement partnership grant. And we really looked at co-teaching. It wasn't in a residency a full year, but it was in a student teaching program. So with that, I've been working in co-teaching for several years. And I'm just going to highlight a few things, which is the evidence behind the co-teaching piece that New Mexico is using as a model. And so co-teaching, I'm a firm believer. And you can see this is the first year of our data. We have 4 years of academic achievement data that was all collected at the elementary level. We have a great deal of secondary qualitative data, but I don't have time to share all that with you. But I just wanted to show you the data here. These are in our state reading proficiency exams in year 1, and it's reading and math. And as you can see, when we have a co-teacher in with a mentor teacher, and again, they had to meet the mentor criteria and all of that, but they were both trained in co-teaching. They both went through a pairs workshop, and so they had support throughout that program. And you can see those students that were in that program statistically outperformed students that were in a classroom with a single teacher. And one of the things I always like to say is that these teachers, our average teacher was 10 years or more. Sure, we had some first-year teachers and things like that, but most of our teachers had a great deal of experience. And then the third category are those students that, because we still had a traditional student teaching program, and we had 2 teachers in the classroom, but they were not trained in co-teaching and they were not co-teaching. So you can see they statistically outperformed those students that were not co-taught. So you can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I always talk about in terms of the essentials, and we don't have time to go into the details of all this, but it's about that preparation. And that's the one thing that New Mexico is doing is statewide, is that they are agreeing on a number of things. And I'm a believer that we must have foundational workshops giving them that baseline information about co-teaching so that we have that common language. And we have threads throughout of what that looks like. I always call it the triad, but our residents, our mentors, and our supervisors, as well as others, but they really must have that same foundational workshop. And one of the things we were able to do at St. Cloud State, because we had a 4-year study, continuing, but a 4-year study, and we were able to embed that work into our courses. So all of our candidates had that. So it wasn't a separate foundation, but they all had the same information. And then there must be ongoing. We all know one and done professional development doesn't work. The other pieces that are really important is, of course, those partnerships, creating that common language. And that's always a challenge, but it's also an incredibly important element that everybody, and that's what New Mexico is doing, is everybody's using the same language, defining strategies the same way, looking at roles, expectations, things like that. And so we at St. Cloud State, and I encourage people to talk, instead of having that solo time, we want our residents to take the lead in all aspects. And there are 4 main aspects. It's co-instruction, co-assessment, co-reflection, and what's my 4th one? Somebody help me. Anyway, there's 4 main areas. And so we want to make sure that our residents are taking the lead, and then they get to lead. They do need solo time, but that's all very different. And then if you don't co-plan, you won't co-teach. So if we don't embed co-planning time into what's going on, it's not going to happen. So you can go to the next slide. One of the things that we have been able to do, and we accelerated the rate that we were going to do this, which has been a challenge, but I think it's been a really positive thing as well. We had 2 train the trainer workshops, which is something that I provide. We did them in May and June. We've had 44 people from the IHEs that have attended, and they become what we call licensed to use the materials and do the foundations and pairs workshops and other support. And we've had 13 people from school districts around the state. And then around those people were trained in May and June. Some people were already doing great things anyway, but they have, but now we're kind of making it much more streamlined, much more consistent. And we've had 253 mentors and residents that have completed both the foundations and pairs workshops. That's to date. And we have 2 more train the trainers coming up in February and March, where other people from around the state can attend those. And then we'll have more people that are able to provide those foundations, pairs, and ongoing support. Next slide. One of the things that we've been able to do here is what I love is it's a systematic, although we don't want to lose the autonomy of each of the programs. So there are a number of things that are going on. We provide the slides that they can use in the foundational workshop because we want that consistency. They're working on dates. They're trying to do things as we move forward. And we did have some glitches because you're trying to get your residents and mentors trained prior to that upcoming year of residency. And so we were trying to rush, but in the upcoming years, it will be much more systematic. And so it will be easier for them to do. We have implemented conversations in co-teaching, and we just had one yesterday, and we have our supervisors tomorrow. We're doing those monthly, and they're hour long, and we have 1 hour where it's just mentors that come together, and we focus on a specific strategy, communication, reflection, different things that are going on. And then we have one that's specifically for the residents. And those are great. They always have an opportunity to be in breakout rooms and have conversations. These are all online, and they're once a month. And we have our first supervisor one coming up tomorrow. And then they are in the process, and we have developed some. They had some from before, but co-teaching videos that can be embedded into the foundation workshop, the pairs trainings, and the ongoing support. And those continue. They're working with a local publishing production company, and those are going to be really good. And then they're working on those mentor expectations, because the consistency, if you're really going to collect data, you don't want to have too many variables out there. So they're always continuing to work on those, what everybody's doing. Next slide. No, not done. So if there's any other questions at the end, happy to help out.
All right. Thanks a lot, Teresa. I'm Michael Weinberg. I, until very recently, was a senior policy officer at the Thornburg Foundation. And Karen, I sort of feel like Al Pacino from one of the Godfather sequels, where he says, you know, I try to get out, but they keep pulling me in. And when I said to Karen and her team, you know, maybe there's someone better for this. And she was like, nope, you have to do it. So I'm really honored to be here. This work is so important to me and to the foundation. And I was looking at the chat as we were getting the meeting started, and it seems like most of you are really working in the field of teacher preparation. And I'm so humbled and grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about our foundation and how we've supported this work. I think if I were recommending like a frame for you to listen to some of what I have to say, it's how might you approach other funders, private funders in particular, to try to get them to support this work. So that's, maybe I'll give you some tips or ideas of things that might resonate as you're thinking about the role of philanthropy. Just very briefly, my background is in education. I started out as a teacher. Sadly, I didn't have the opportunity to go through a residency. I had a traditional 10-week student teaching, and Teresa, I had that solo takeover period, and I was nowhere near ready like these residents are. So that's part of why, you know, firsthand, I believe so strongly in the power of paying people to learn how to teach alongside someone who's really good at doing that. So next slide. Just a little bit about our foundation. We're based in Santa Fe. I think what sets us apart a little bit is that we're really focused on trying to influence policy change at the state level, that we believe that it's the system itself in each of our focus areas that needs to shift. Education is the area that I was overseeing, I was with the foundation for close to 11 years, but we also work in food systems, good government, and water. And in all of those, these are some of the sort of guiding principles for our foundation, our values. Next slide. I talked about this idea of systems change, and I think that as we get into the question and answer, I'll go into these in more detail, but these are like the big buckets that we tend to fund. And it's important, obviously, that there be dollars to run specific programs, but a lot of what we're doing is thinking about how can we take what is a promising practice and lift it up and then move it into what is like the fabric of our state's educational system. So I'll definitely talk about the role of advocacy, evaluation, and how we developed what has become policy in our state and how we're supporting the ongoing implementation and really prepared to teach's role in all of that as well. All right, next slide. This is a little bit of just another way of saying the same thing, that we fund research, we fund demonstration of these promising practice, and then getting the right people together, convening. That's something that as a foundation we can be trusted in that way, to really get people around the table to talk about policy formation. And then some of the things that we don't fund are listed at the bottom, and some of those are what I would consider to be a little more traditional for some foundations. So that does, as I said, set us apart a little bit. And I look forward to the panel portion of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, Teresa, and Michael. We're going to shift right now into that panel portion. So actually, we're going to just dive right in. And Michael, the first question is going to be for you. I would love if you can share from your perspective how New Mexico built the readiness to really coalesce around the vision of paid teacher residencies.
I would love to. I'm going to, Yep, I was going to say, since I'm not on mute, I'm going to do one thing, though. There was also a question about stories from the like success stories. Can I tell one real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, and then I will get into your real question. But one thing that I wanted to share that I think is exciting is that I've been particularly involved in some work in Albuquerque. That's a partnership between UNM and Albuquerque Public School System and the Teachers Union. And they sort of like this webinar. They just let me show up and help. And one of the things that I've had the privilege of doing is sitting in on some of the interviews for the prospective residents. And there are two things that this last round of interviewing really stood out to me. One is they have been doing this long enough now that some of their earliest residents are now mentor teachers, which I think is just really exciting in the sense of you get people who are trained the way that you then want them to train. And so I'm very excited by that. And then the second thing that I just wanted to lift up is we had applicants from out of state who wanted to be part of the program. And, I'm like slightly nervous that if residencies become the norm nationally, then we lose our competitive advantage as a state. But I think that would be a good problem to have. I really do think that we can sometimes get down on ourselves about education in New Mexico, and to see that teachers want to come here and teach. And I do think that the way that we've structured these residencies is a big part of it, is something very exciting. Okay, that said, you asked, will you repeat your question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Back
So
here.
we'd love if you can speak a bit about, what was happening in New Mexico that allowed the state to build this readiness and really coalesce around the vision of paid teacher residencies.
Yeah. So what I would say, it's easy in 2024 to forget that this has actually been a gradual process. And Phoebe shared that timeline that showed, in 2018, we began with a pilot in Albuquerque, and we've made what I would consider to be like incremental progress since then. So that was really started without any sort of big effort from the state. It was at a local level, which I think is often the case. I think the legislature got wind of that and passed a piece of legislation to create teacher residency pilot programs. I would say that didn't go very well. I mean, I guess the beauty of a pilot program is that you're learning, but looking back, I don't think they were the kind of across the board, the quality that we were looking for. However, there were some pockets of like inspiration where it was working well. So one of the things that we did fairly early on, well, there were two things. One is we brought in Linda Darling Hammond, and by we, I'm saying the Thornburg Foundation, our Legislative Education Study Committee, which Karen referred to, was interested in how do we improve our system. And so Dr. Darling Hammond came in and talked about a variety of things that were part of this report called No Time to Lose. One of them was specifically about how we prepare teachers. Not surprisingly, that's a huge lever of change, and she really accentuated residencies as a promising practice. I think that got excitement at the legislative level, and Karen was talking about signals from the top early on, and I think that was one way that we created that signal from the top. I was actually thinking about the role of the legislature versus the executive. And we've had a considerable amount of change on the executive side, but there's been a little bit of a steadier focus on the legislative side. So we did that. The other thing is we funded an evaluation of one of those early pilot programs, and we wanted to demonstrate the efficacy of this approach. So we were able to show that, not surprisingly, and these are some of the data points that Phoebe highlighted, we saw increased teacher retention. We saw increased diversity in terms of the teacher workforce. And we used some proxy data to say that students were performing better. So that allowed us to make a compelling argument at the legislature. The other two things I would highlight in terms of building readiness, briefly, we took advantage of a crisis to some extent. Right after COVID, our teacher vacancy rate spiked. I think it was a bit of a statistical aberration that was related to the pandemic, but there was a bit of panic, like, oh no, we have a teacher shortage, and we were able to come in, and I'm using the royal we in this case, our grantees and advocates, and say teacher preparation is a way of being responsive to that teacher vacancy crisis. And we were flush with cash as a state. We've done very well in the last few years because of oil and gas revenue. And we were able to make the argument that this is these stipends that we're paying are a really good investment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but Prepared to Teach Again was helpful in terms of some of the cost modeling to support that. So I know I went on a while there, but hopefully that gives some context as to how we built that support.
Yeah, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks, Michael. And now, Phoebe, the question's for you. So the PED has been absolutely central in this work, and you shared the vision earlier for how there should be multiple entry points for aspiring teachers, whether they're high schoolers, traditional undergraduates, career changers, into high quality paid residency preparation. Can you speak to how PED has been supportive of policy shifts that orient towards the vision and help align educator preparation policy with long-term quality goals?
Yeah, so I think as Michael mentioned, teacher workforce crisis and high vacancy numbers have really kind of led to several initiatives in the state to address the workforce crisis. So grow your own programs. We have our educator fellows is one of those. Educators Rising, alt licensure has really skyrocketed. I think over 60% of candidates in New Mexico are going through alternative programs. But I think within all of that, there's been a realization that there's a high cost when it comes to turnover, and that preparation really matters as a key lever in ensuring that our candidates are fully prepared to address the evolving needs of our students, and that they will be equipped to stay in the profession. So that's where kind of New Mexico Residencies was really designed with those multiple entry points in mind, that would ideally lead to that high quality preparation of a residency. So even like a post-baccalaureate pathway, that's supposed to be designed as a teacher of record model would be able to change its programming slightly to be able to participate in residencies. And that's really what we're delving into and exploring right now. So it is really that recognition from, national research and some research that we're trying to conduct locally, especially within the EIR grant, about how preparation ultimately leads to cost savings and greater impacts in our schools. If we have higher quality educators and they have the access to those high quality preparation pathways, that's all going to eventually result in cost savings in the end. So really thinking about, I think alternative licensure is wonderful in many ways and has brought many candidates into the profession, but how do we also equip those candidates with the preparation that they need to really serve students? And so residencies has been, an entry point to that, and the funding that we have to support it has really allowed for that to be integrated.
Thank you for that, Phoebe.
Okay, so Teresa, as you shared with us already, you've been helping PED strengthen the quality of programs in the state by supporting the co-teaching training all across New Mexico. And we know you've worked in other states also. So we'd love if you could speak to how your experience in New Mexico is similar to or different from what you've seen and what other work you've supported in other states.
Sure. Well, first, I've been really blessed, and it's not just me. There was a whole team of us to be doing these train the trainers across the country. And I don't know what our data is, but well over 5,000 people across the country have been through, and even some international, have been through our train the trainer program. What's different about New Mexico is that it is a statewide system. I have lived and breathed where, and one of the things that we say when you come to a train the trainer, you need to come as a team, because this can't be an individual initiative. It needs to be a systematic, and in most cases, a university-wide change, so that if I leave, I take a different job, I move on, it doesn't die with me. And that's the difference, is if New Mexico, which they are doing, gets this to where it is a systematic statewide, I move to another institution out of state, that whole process is already in there. Now, there have been a lot of really great things going on around the state or other states. And what I'm seeing, and we got our grant in 2003. So we've been doing this for a long time, but many states have embedded co-teaching as a rule that the student teaching, the residency model must be a co-teaching model. So that's happening, but the whole piece that New Mexico is doing is it's year-long residencies, because some are 1 semester, year-long residency with mentor support, and that it is a statewide, and the money behind it. I mean, I know it's not all about money, but the support that allows a resident to really focus on that student teaching or that residency model and not have to work nights and weekends to be able to afford to live. So that's the difference now. And I've not seen, I know there's a lot of talk and a lot, I mean, we have statewide AACTEs and lots of teacher ed programs where people are talking about it, but I haven't seen where a whole state, I know people are writing grants where they're doing it as a whole state. So the piece that I've found is the sustainability that I see will be the real gift that New Mexico is going to be able to share with the world, is going to be the biggest benefit. Well, not the biggest, it's going to be one of the great benefits of this whole model.
Wonderful, thank you.
And Phoebe, back to you. PED has gotten 2 federal grants to support this work. Can you speak a bit to those and how they help further the state's goals?
Sure. Yeah. Again, just want to give a shout out to Prepared to Teach, because these federal grants would not be possible without their immense efforts and support to make them happen, both in application and in implementation. So very grateful for Prepared to Teach support with that. But really the focus when applying for these grants, we just felt that it was extremely important to align these external grants that in a way that they would really supplement and support core work that was already happening in the state. So both the EIR grant, the Education Innovation and Research Grant, and the ABA2, the Apprenticeship Grant, were built in that way so that they were really aligning with all things that the state had already set as priorities around preparation. So the EIR, the major focus of the EIR grant is around recruitment and building out our recruitment initiatives to really motivate and draw people into these high quality preparation pathways, and really have that representative workforce in New Mexico that matters. It's focused on reducing program variability, which is really that co-teaching focus. So providing those trainings, both the foundations and the pairs training, like Teresa was saying, so that we're really equipping New Mexico's districts with this high quality, well-trained workforce to support high quality residency in the classroom through the co-teaching model. And the EIR has really going to help facilitate that work over the next few years. And then program variability, or like I said, sustainability for residencies. We want this to be a system that is how educators in New Mexico are trained and prepared so that they want to stay in their profession longer, and they feel prepared with the skills they need to do so. And we want that to exist no matter what happens with government or state politics. We want that to be a system that New Mexico really embraces, and using the grant to facilitate that. And then with the apprenticeship grant, really thinking about how the apprenticeship model in teaching, how that can connect to what a residency really is, and defining a high quality apprenticeship model that is very much linked to what we've worked to define with a teacher residency model, so that when we talk about apprenticeship in New Mexico, it really is teacher residency, and they're one and the same. So thinking about how we can integrate all of the great resources that exist on the labor side that support apprenticeships to really help support candidates in completing these full year residencies.
Thank you, Phoebe.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to all of you. So we're going to shift just to a quick final round robin. So there's a few minutes left for some audience questions. So real quickly, each of you will go in the same order as you did your presentation. So Phoebe, you first. What would a piece of advice be to other states who might want to undertake this kind of transformation?
Gosh, I feel like I'm not in a place to give advice, because I've been the wonderful benefactor of so many outside resources that have come together to make this happen. But I think a piece of advice. So I think that the piece of advice is that it is really important to kind of have the background and set the stage before the work can move forward at any real pace. I think like Michael was sharing, and before I came on to be the director of this bureau, there was so much groundwork that was laid around, research nationally, local research, surveys that went out, like Michael said, the crisis that happened. There was so much that happened that actually laid the foundation to getting a lot of this off the ground. So as much as that foundation can be laid, and then with a strategy in place to really capitalize on the momentum that comes from that, I think that's what has made this as possible as it has been.
Great, thanks, Phoebe. Same question to you, Teresa. Any top piece of advice for folks interested in doing this kind of work in other states?
Well, what I would say is that there's not one right way to do this. It can fit into any program, but what is critical is that you have that foundational understanding and common language. Because if I just asked everybody that was here today, how would you define co-teaching? It's 100 different ways. And so you have to have a clear cut, and it has to be focused on the human resources that are in the classroom. And it's not just two people there. It's how you're looking at what the kids' needs are and the instruction that goes on behind that and the planning for that. It's not just, oh, let's just do it this way today. It has to be based on some form of assessment. I don't mean it has to be a test, but why are we doing this strategy? It's about the kids. It's about enhancing the learning for them while the resident is learning as well. And there's not one right way to do it, but there is a foundation that has to be set so that you have the consistency and can determine if the program is working.
Thanks, Teresa. And Michael, finally to you, any advice for other states interested in this kind of work?
Sure, this is a shameless plug for Prepared to Teach, but I would say it's the role of intermediaries, that we have a phenomenal team at the Public Education Department. I see Katie on the call. Justin is relatively new, but they've been they've done fantastic, and there really is a need for the kind of support that Prepared to Teach has provided, whether it's, I talked about some cost modeling, the technical assistance through the community of practice, these big federal grants that we've gotten. Prepared to Teach has helped write those, and I'm using the word helped very loosely. So that would be my push, is that recognizing that there are these supports. And then we learned that we didn't have to invent the wheel on this stuff, that there are these best practices out there. So that's my advice.
Thank you, panelists.
All right, and thank you to our panelists once again. There is a question in the chat, and I invite anyone in the audience who has a question to speak in the next 2 minutes or so. The question in the chat by Kate, curious if districts are going to be supporting residencies financially, or if the legislature will be supporting long-term.
I just popped an answer in the chat as well, but I think that's a great question and something that we have been exploring deeply. I think we definitely, for sustainability purposes, we're thinking really critically about how braided funding can happen, and how one of the challenges we've always come up against is that the legislature provides the stipend, but there's not benefits along with that. And that's been one of our challenges in recruitment, is some of the other initiatives do provide benefits that exist in the state. So I think thinking about how we can really create a system where districts have some ownership in this, and that they're supporting the preparation of their future teachers is really important. And that's part of what we're also looking at through our EAR grant and that continuing work around sustainability.
All right, thanks, Phoebe.
Thank you all for being here again. Our team and maybe some of the panelists can hang on if you're interested in doing that. But I think Gretchen is going to put that last slide back up in case you would like to subscribe to the newsletter. We don't spam, it's once a month, and that's where releases like the case study came out. In all of our resources at Prepare to Teach, we have a real commitment just sharing the good news. Our goal is to work ourselves out of a job because everybody's got this problem solved about how people can do quality preparation in a paid manner. And so all of our resources are Creative Commons licensed, which means you can use them, you can rebrand them. That is actually encouraged. Just please do say, you learned some of this from Prepare to Teach when you do that. But our link tree, that middle piece, the link tree has lots of different resources, sort of points to different things on our website. And then the case study directly on New Mexico, which is super inspirational, is on that slide too. So thank you so much for being here.